Morning gore, evening whisper, then it's sister. Good to have everybody with us here with Temperance Awakening. And now we will begin our first alcohol lecture. And the first thing that we're going to look at is addictive behaviors and alcohol. And so this is the first thing that we're going to look at. In our second lecture, the next time that we meet, we're going to look at a little bit more of an overview, like about alcohol and the dangers about alcohol. So with our first one here, we're just going to look at addictive behaviors and alcohol. And like some of these terms that we're using here, like addictive behaviors, along with alcohol, heavy drinking, these kind of terms here can be rather vague, so we're going to define some of these terms as to what their definitions are according to the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. And a heavy drinker, they consider the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. A heavy drinker consumes 5 or more drinks, or maybe sometimes 4 for women, on at least 5 different occasions during a month. So in other words, anybody who drinks a 6-pack of beer once or twice every weekend is going to be considered a heavy drinker. And some adults, according to like the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism with their terminology, some adults can be heavy drinkers for years without falling into the category of alcohol abusers, like i.e. people who consume alcohol excessively. They may always drink in a pleasant social setting, but never drive after drinking and be responsible spouses, parents, and employees, etc. But for young people, though, heavy drinking is usually very difficult to manage and is generally associated with abuse. So the different impact that alcohol has on different individuals make it difficult to generalize when discussing alcohol use, abuse, and addiction. So what affects one person one way may not affect somebody else, in that same way, it could affect them differently. So still by definition, though alcohol abuse is always a problem behavior. And the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism defines the term as a pattern of drinking that results in one or more of the following situations within a 12-month period. That could be failure to fulfill major work, school, or home responsibilities, drinking in situations that are physically dangerous, such as while driving a car or operating machinery, having recurring alcohol-related legal problems, such as being arrested for driving under the influence of alcohol, or for physically hurting someone while drunk, and continued drinking despite having ongoing relationship problems that are caused or worsened by the drinking. So a person can abuse alcohol without being an alcoholic officially, that is, without the physical dependence. The cravings may not be overpowering, and the person may be able to stop drinking on any one occasion. However, the abusive behavior patterns are difficult to overcome, and it may be difficult for alcohol abusers to develop safe drinking behaviors. And now looking at some more of the definitions here of drinking behaviors. The terms alcohol addiction, alcohol dependency, and alcoholism are often used to mean the same thing. However, they can be used to highlight different aspects of the same behavior. The term addiction can be used for any drug as well as for other patterns of behavior, such as gambling, food addiction, somebody that overeats, tobacco. Addiction is a chronic disease in which a person has a physical and psychological need or craving for the substance or behavior. It lasts for a long period of time and is difficult or impossible to cure. It can be controlled, but relapses are common in which the person slips back into his or her old problematic behavior. Binge drinking refers to a period of drinking 5 or more drinks at one sitting. This is sometimes called heavy episodic drinking. Episodic because it only happens now and then. Not all the time, but just on an occasional basis. Some reports consider a woman to be engaged in binge drinking if she drinks 4 or more drinks at one time, as, women, usually have a shorter, they have like a much shorter tolerance, maybe a much shorter, but generally speaking, a shorter tolerance, to alcohol than men do. Dependency is used only for drug-related addiction. It usually refers to a physical condition in the addict's brains and other organs. Anybody who is dependent on a drug needs periodic doses of the drug just to avoid painful, uncomfortable, or frightening symptoms. That might not even just be drugs in this time. That can even be food, or gambling, or like an addiction, a dependency on television, or video games. How some people even get with that. Usually, though, that has to do, with alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, or illicit drugs. And like we said there, withdrawal, we'll talk about that in just a little bit as well. Alcoholism means an addiction to alcohol. It includes a strong alcoholism, that is. Let me say that. I'm not sure if I said it right. Alcoholism means an addiction to alcohol that includes a strong craving or compulsion to drink at regular intervals every day for many alcoholics, or maybe just periodically, for example, on weekends for some other people. It includes a loss of control. Once an alcoholic takes one drink, he or she generally can't stop. Alcoholics also have a physical dependence on the drug and experience withdrawal symptoms if they stop drinking. Some alcoholics vary their behaviors between episodes of excessive drinking and periods of sobriety. Alcoholics who have overcome their cravings and have been sober for a long period of time are usually considered alcoholics in recovery. And now looking at tolerance here underneath this. People who drink a large amount of alcohol, especially those who have become dependent on alcohol, usually develop a degree of tolerance. People who need to drink more to get the same mental effect, or who get less of a buzz when they drink their usual amount, probably have an acquired tolerance to alcohol. They say things like, I really can't hold my liquor, or, I can drink you under the table. People that have that big tolerance. People who claim that, they can just drink a lot and not really be affected by it. Tolerance occurs as the brain and nervous system become accustomed to alcohol. The nerve cells adapt their normal functioning to compensate for the effects of the drug. However, even in the brain, the tolerance can only go so far. A heavy drinker might need more alcohol to get drunk, but only a little bit more to black out, go into a coma, or die. And so as tolerance develops and drinkers continually increase their dose, the brain might adjust, but other organs can be seriously damaged, as we mentioned there, so damaged that it can lead to death. If somebody's going to, black out or go into a coma. An alcoholic's liver can develop metabolic tolerance to alcohol by learning to break down or metabolize a larger amount of the substance in a given period of time than the liver of a non-alcoholic. However, none of the other vital organs are so flexible. A given amount of alcohol inflicts the same amount of damage to an alcoholic's stomach, their heart, their arteries, their bones, and other organs as it does with the casual drinkers, even if the alcoholic never feels drunk. A high degree of tolerance can give heavy drinkers a false sense of security. They might not feel drunk, but in all likelihood their coordination, reflexes, and judgment are impaired. People who develop a high tolerance to alcohol shouldn't be fooled into thinking that they can safely drive or perform other difficult or dangerous tasks just because they don't feel drunk. And as we said, you got to be careful with that in the health aspect, because, with that tolerance, that can really damage, like, your heart, arteries, a lot of your organs there. And tolerance might vary with the environment. Some people can drive home along a familiar route, even after, having a few drinks, if it's, the same route that they always go. But if they try a different route, that same level of blood alcohol can cause a lot of impairment. So alcoholics often lose their high level of tolerance after an extended period of time, and then even one drink makes them drunk. This might be a sign of liver damage and shouldn't be ignored. You should go see a physician if that happens. It can also lead to severe unexpected intoxication, obviously, which is extremely dangerous when driving or, when doing other tasks or even dealing with other people. And now looking at withdrawals. When alcoholics or heavy drinkers suddenly stop drinking, or when they drastically cut back on the amount that they drink, they usually experience some form of withdrawal. Withdrawal refers to the combination of painful and uncomfortable symptoms they feel as their bodies try to readapt to an alcohol-free bloodstream. When the brain and nervous system are suddenly deprived of alcohol, they quickly try to readjust to their normal drug-free behavior. This sounds simple, but it's very unpleasant to experience. According to scientists, the nerve cells in the brain become accustomed to working extra hard to overcome the depressing effects of alcohol. For a while, they continue to work overtime, but without alcohol to slow them down, they're in a super excited state. A few hours later, after the last drink, the patient may feel weak, shaky, and anxious, and usually suffers from headaches, nausea, and stomach cramps. Somewhat later, they begin to feel agitated and start to crave another drink. As the hours go by, severe tremors or shaking might develop, followed by hallucinations, seeing and hearing things that aren't there. In more severe cases, brain seizures could occur and need to be treated immediately, by a physician with some powerful medicine. In the worst case scenario, it's called Delirium Tremens, or the DTs for short. These intense, terrifying hallucinations continue to 3 to 4 hours, accompanied by high fevers and extremely aggressive behavior. A century ago, up to 40% of DT cases resulted in death. However, improvements in treatment today have reduced the rate to 5%, according to a 1998 study reported in the Southern Medical Journal. The majority of cases of severe withdrawal occur in older people who've been drinking for many, many years, but people as young as 20 can also experience these withdrawals depending on how much and how long they've been drinking. Teenagers should also bear in mind that even a mild withdrawal could set the stage for more severe problems later on due to the kindling effect, which means that when alcoholics go through withdrawal more than once, the symptoms often get more severe each time. The nerve cells seem to become kindled. They are not charged up enough to cause problems now, but any additional charge in the future could push them over the top. Evidence suggests that people who show this effect are in greater danger of relapse, i.e. returning to alcohol abuse, and also are more likely to suffer brain damage. Even relatively mild cases of withdrawal might need medical attention. Anybody who makes that courageous decision to fight alcohol dependence should arrange to have help in advance, which is what we are also here for at Temperance Awakening. And so what are the symptoms and behaviors of alcohol abuse and alcoholism? Teenagers are among alcohol's most obvious victims. When young people drink, lots of bad things happen, to the drinkers and to those around them. As a result, Congress and state legislators in the United States have made it illegal to sell or serve alcohol in the U.S. to people under 21 years old. However, the laws have not, always been enforced. And underage drinking continues. And many, teenagers have fallen into dangerous habits of heavy drinking, abuse, and even addiction. Other kids are at risk of doing the same. Many of them may not even be aware of the dangers that they face. And the 22 things that we're going to talk about throughout these, the first 22 articles that we're going to talk about in these lectures here with Temperance Awakening, follow the problems associated with alcohol and addiction. And so you're going to discover that, on the risk factors for alcohol abuse and the signs that show whether you, or maybe somebody have begun to develop addictive problems with alcohol. And so hopefully what we have here in these lectures are going to help keep you out of harm's way or help you start dealing with any problems that you already have. And now looking at the signs of alcohol abuse. Some alcoholics are so skilled at concealing their problem that even friends, family members, and coworkers may not suspect the extent of their drinking. In the majority of cases, however, especially with younger drinkers, some signs of alcohol abuse can be a tip-off to concerned loved ones, and there's some of them here that we'll name. Drinking alone, being unable to cut back, drinking in the morning, keeping a supply of alcohol in a hidden place, wishing they had a drink, going to school or work drunk, drinking even while taking prescription drugs against the physician's orders, gulping instead of sipping alcohol, lying to family and friends about drinking, finding excuses to drink, drinking more than they intended, saying it's just a phase, drinking to escape problems or to fall asleep, having blackouts, spending large amounts of time sleeping off hangovers, losing interest in, like school or work and, family and friends, and starting to fall behind in our activities, avoiding friends who don't drink, feeling tired all the time without being ill, feeling more irritable than usual, and getting angry if somebody raises the subject of their drinking. And now looking at the stages of drinking problems. Every human being possesses his or her own physical, psychological, and social makeup. Among people who drink, not everybody's going to develop the exact same habits. Still, many people who become alcoholics do seem to follow a particular pattern. And this is known as progression, or moving from one stage to another to a more serious stage. And there are different definitions of these stages. The National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence states the typical progression from alcohol use to addiction involves these stages. The experimental stage, which is curiosity about the effects of alcohol, causes the user to try alcohol one or more times. Then the social stage, which is alcohol is used occasionally in social situations, such as parties or with friends. The dependent stage, when the user becomes obsessed with alcohol and consumes it regularly, often alone. And then the chronic stage, the user feels constant emotional or physical pain, which can be lessened only by alcohol. And so now, looking at addicting substances among teenagers, where does alcohol rank in this? And despite all the attention that marijuana, cocaine, club drugs, like other illegal substances in the media, alcohol remains the most widely used and abused addicting drug among young Americans, even including tobacco, like when it becomes, to addicting drugs. So alcohol and its, addiction factor is even more widespread among teens than tobacco. The 2002 Monitoring the Future survey of the National Institute on Drug Abuse found that nearly twice as many 8th, 10th, and 12th graders had consumed alcohol in the previous month than had smoked cigarettes. Like 48% of 12th graders had alcohol, while only 26% had tobacco. 35% of 10th graders had alcohol, when only 18% had tobacco. And then 20% of the 8th graders had alcohol, when only 11% had cigarettes. And so experts may debate whether one particular drug is more or less addictive than another. That is, whether a user would find it harder to give up alcohol, rather than marijuana. And the fact is hard to determine, but the number of teenagers who suffer from alcohol abuse dwarfs the number for any other drug, showing that alcohol use is a very serious problem. The latest figures, according to the National Household Survey on Drug Abuse, a project of the Federal Department of Health and Human Services that gets its information from families themselves, reported that in 2000, 2.6% of all kids aged 12 to 17 were heavy drinkers. According to the NHSDA, a heavy drinker had 5 or more drinks on the same occasion at least 5 different days in the past 30 days. So in addition, another 7.8% were binge drinkers who had 5 or more drinks at least once, but fewer than 5 times in that 30-day period. So this adds up to a large number of young people, more than 5 million teenage alcohol abusers, according to the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism. And of course, not all of these kids are addicted. Hopefully, most of the bingers will avoid becoming addicted. In 1996, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, 182,000 adolescents or young adults under age 20 received treatment for substance abuse in the U.S., and 55% of them were treated for abusing alcohol, either alcohol alone or with another substance. And comparing those facts to other drugs each year, Monitoring the Future, a project under the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, surveys about 50,000 kids in grades 8, 10, and 12 about their use of drugs, including alcohol and tobacco. The good news is that just about every drug, including alcohol, saw small but significant declines in use in the past years, but the pattern remains the same. Alcohol is abused more than any other drug. In fact, alcohol is abused more than all illicit drugs combined, those illicit drugs being marijuana, cocaine, inhalants, hallucinogens such as LSD, ecstasy, heroin, amphetamines, barbiturates, and tranquilizers. For example, in 2002 Monitoring the Future found that among 12th graders, 48.6% had used alcohol at least once, while 30.3% had gotten drunk in the previous 30 days, as compared with 25.4% who had used all other drugs. And over the course of the year, 71.5% had used alcohol, while 50.4% had gotten drunk, and 41% had used other drugs. So now, what are the risk factors in all this? And so there are a number of risk factors or causes that can influence a teenager who has experimented with alcohol to lose control and become dependent. Like some of these cases, are going to, include family history, their friends' behavior, and things, that are beyond the person's control. But there's, always something, that a person can do to limit the impact of these factors. Like if, you have parents, a family history of alcohol abuse, or like friends, if you go to a school, you're in a community that has a high, intake of alcohol abuse, there's still something that can be done to prevent alcohol from ruining somebody's life. And looking first there at the family history, and perhaps the greatest single risk factor for alcohol abuse for a person is the family history of alcoholism. And people have long noticed that alcohol abuse runs in families, but they didn't know how it was passed along from one generation to the next. Was it a behavior pattern that children learned from watching their parents, or was it some inherited chemical factor that made certain people more susceptible to the dangers of alcohol, or was it just maybe a combination of both of the factors? By now, the majority of scientists who have studied the subject believe that the family's genes are responsible for alcoholism in families. And so it just depends if that's it can be in your genetics. If your parents, grandparents had it, that can be in your genetics, just like obesity, the way that runs in a lot of families as well. Studies of identical twins have found that if one twin is alcoholic, the other's quite likely to be alcoholic too. Other studies have found that kids from alcoholic families tend to have alcohol problems, even if adopted and raised by non-alcoholics, and vice versa. And so take note that the majority of children from families with a history of alcoholism do not themselves become alcoholic. However, more of them do than children of non-alcoholic families. According to the alcohol researcher D.W. Goodwin, 20 to 25% of sons and brothers of alcoholics and 5% of daughters and sisters of alcoholics will become alcoholics themselves. And also, these kids tend to become alcohol abusers and alcoholics at an earlier age than other people, and may suffer a more severe form of the disease. And so now looking at friends who drink. Most people are influenced, by their friends for better or for worse. And unfortunately, that's going to go for alcohol abuse as well. If a circle of friends drinks, then, that one individual with those friends is usually going to find it difficult to resist drinking. And even if that person don't become dependent, drinking among groups of teenagers often takes abusive forms. An individual might believe that they're strong enough to resist the influence of their friends, but if you feel that you're at risk for alcohol problems due to family background or other factors, then that individual, might want to make a point of staying away from a circle of friends that drink. And now looking at home and school problems. Problems at home and school, too, can lead to alcohol abuse. Most people don't try to escape their problems with drugs, but some do take that path. Alcohol, like many other drugs, might seem like a help to get things off your mind, to get troubles off your mind. And if your family's going through a rough period, such as, your parents getting a divorce, like you're kind of struggling in school, or if you've broken up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, they can be tempted to escape their worries, by drinking. And that can put a person at risk for substance abuse. And the real danger is that a person might come to think that alcohol is the only way to relieve their feelings of sadness or anxiety. And, if you feel that way or somebody else, then they're at a very high risk of becoming dependent. At times like these, we need to be aware of the behaviors, because that's very important. Becoming aware of behaviors is very important. Try to find healthy alternatives to drinking, such as, community service, finding an activity to do, getting a hobby, playing ball or something to give themselves a little bit of a perspective. Always bear in mind that whatever the problem might be, adding alcohol to that situation is only going to make it worse. And now the psychological factors. And kids, with emotional problems are at a greater risk for any type of drug abuse. From studies that have been alcohol abuse, we're talking about now, tobacco, marijuana, even food, maybe not even a drug, but something, like food, something that gives a person comfort, and that's really for everybody, even adults, but probably, younger people, they're gonna be more prone to abuse something than adults are. Like people who suffer from long-term depression are considered to be at risk, just like people that have difficulty coping, with normal problems and challenges of life, especially teen life. And for example, teenagers who feel insecure about their looks or social skills, studies have shown that they often do turn to like alcohol, in the belief that, that's going to help them with their shyness or inhibition, just like a lot of people, can choose to turn to tobacco to try to look more mature, and so forth. And then other kids, like kids who feel too much pressure to achieve, for example, from parents, teachers, or coaches, they might try to relieve that pressure by turning to alcohol. Now, not every teenage alcoholic started out as an emotionally troubled kid, but some drink as a way to feel independent, to stand up to authority, like we said, to look more mature, to rebel or whatever. Although most people will not progress from the rebellious stage to alcoholism if somebody's at risk due to other factors, then they should probably try to find a more appropriate way of acting grown up. Like some teens say frankly that they drink because they choose to get drunk, and you can't fault their honesty, because you could ask them a simple question: if they get drunk on a regular basis, are they really in control of their behavior? No, they're not if they get drunk on a regular basis. And then looking at the age of onset, researchers have found that the younger a child is when he or she begins to drink, the more likely they're going to become dependent on alcohol. And that's just about true for everything, every other drug, even tobacco, marijuana, etc. Very few of these young kids expect to become addicted, but they often do. And not all kids who take their first drink at an early age, are going to become dependent on alcohol. But just like we just said, there does seem to be a pattern, by research that has been done. Like a 1991 report by the American Academy of Pediatrics found that 1 out of 7 fourth graders who are just only 9 years old, so starting very young there, had already become drunk at least once. Then 10 years later, the National Household Survey found that 1 out of every 7 of the same age cohort, who was now 19, were heavy drinkers. And so, and given their smaller size, especially when you're talking about somebody that's only 9 or 10 years old, children absorb alcohol into their bloodstream at a much faster rate, than older kids, like older teenagers or adults would. They become drunk sooner and remain drunk for a longer period of time. And the toxic effects on the young nervous system, which is still developing, are likely to be more serious too. And these drinkers may easily become physically tolerant or addicted to alcohol, later on in life if they continue drinking. The circumstances of a child's or teen's first alcohol experience are also very important in determining how they behave in the future. Like in many other foreign countries and among many immigrant communities in the U.S., parents might allow children, to taste beer, wine, or liquor at social or religious occasions. And for years, researchers have found lower levels of alcoholism among the children at first or second generation of Americans with Italian, Greek, Chinese, and Jewish origins who generally follow these type of traditions. Important family milestones are celebrated with a round of drinks and toasts. For many Catholics and Jews, drinking wine plays an important role in their religious ceremonies. Wine is usually served at the Passover Seder in Jewish homes, and then among Catholics at a Christmas dinner, with Italian Catholics, and kids are allowed to partake. And for such kids, the researchers believe that alcohol is not a forbidden, in that case, alcohol is not a forbidden fruit associated with rebellion, but just another part of the traditional diet. So whenever young teenagers, drink, like in these things, with the Jewish Passover or at a Catholic service, alcohol is not viewed as a forbidden fruit, among people, in families where, if, alcohol is absolutely forbidden. And so experts argue about whether such practices, if adopted in the future by all Americans, will reduce alcoholism. However, in today's world, very young drinkers usually have their first drink outside the home, which exposes them to a high level of risk. So people here who do get alcohol this way, from these religious services, that is a very, very small minority of people. Because most people underage who are going to drink, they're going to do that outside the home in a rebellious manner, where their parents don't know. And now looking at, rehabilitation programs. If you or somebody has a problem with alcohol, do not despair. There's a lot of treatment out there, professionals who can help people deal with alcohol abuse. And, we're one of those, that's why we have this ministry here of Temperance Awakening, where we charge people nothing to come, might have to pay for a book, like a book or something, but that's all that they would have to do there. And so do get help, from an organized treatment program. And, we're not the only one out there. And so find help, though, from somebody. And so now looking at a self-test. Looking at a self-test here about alcohol. And this is something, if you're not one of those that's having a problem with alcohol, but, you're viewing this or getting help from us because, you have a relative or a friend that is, let's look at some of these questions here. Most people in the early stages of alcohol of dependence are blissfully unaware that they have a problem, or they might be trying hard not to admit it to themselves. If a person drinks more than once in a while, then, they're going to want to ask themselves these following 20 questions. Like if you might have a problem with alcohol, think you might, or once again, you're viewing this because you have a relative, a loved one that might, get a piece of paper and write some of these questions down and, give it to that individual or answer them yourself. First here, looking at this first section here, personality changes. So that's personality changes if you want to write it down. And although other causes may account for these issues, alcohol might well be one. And so here's the first question. Am I losing interest in schoolwork and starting to fall behind? So that's, am I losing interest in schoolwork and starting to fall behind? Number 2, do I avoid my old friends who don't drink? So that's, do I avoid my old friends who don't drink? Number 3, do I feel tired all the time without being ill? Do I feel tired all the time without being ill? Number 4, do I feel more irritable than in the past? Do I feel more irritable than in the past? Number 5, do I get angry if somebody asks me any of the questions above? That's number 5. Do I get angry if somebody asks me any of the questions above? Number 6, do I get angry if somebody raises the subject of my drinking alcohol? And do I get angry if somebody raises the subject of my drinking alcohol? Number 7, do I find myself lying to family and friends about how often and how much I drink? Do I find myself lying to family and friends about how often and how much I drink? And so now we're going to look at changes in drinking patterns. Changes in drinking patterns, and these are usually signs of alcohol abuse. The first question under this one, do I drink alone? Do I drink alone? And then, do I drink in the morning? Do I drink in the morning? Then, do I go to school or work drunk? Do I go to school or work drunk? Do I drink even while taking prescription drugs against a physician's orders? Do I drink even while taking prescription drugs against a physician's orders? Do I drink to escape problems or to fall asleep? Do I drink to escape problems or to fall asleep? Do I explain my drinking as just a phase? Do I explain my drinking as just a phase? Do I gulp instead of sipping alcohol? Do I gulp instead of sipping alcohol? Do I have blackouts forgetting what happened while I was drinking? Do I have blackouts forgetting what happened while I was drinking? Do I spend a lot of time sleeping off hangovers? Do I spend a lot of time sleeping off hangovers? And now looking at cravings and loss of control. Cravings and loss of control. And these are signs that abuse might be turning into an addiction. The first question, do I wind up drinking more than I intended when I picked up the first glass? Do I wind up drinking more than I intended when I picked up the first glass? Second question under this section, do I keep a supply of alcohol in a hidden place? Do I keep a supply of alcohol in a hidden place? And then do I find myself wishing I had a drink? Do I find myself wishing I had a drink? And then lastly, do I look for excuses to drink? Do I look for excuses to drink? When counting up all of these answers here, did you answer yes to more than 15 questions? If you answered yes to more than 15 questions, then, you need to talk to somebody about your drinking behaviors. And also remember, like, a drinking buddy is not a good choice here, somebody that you drink with, unless they're going to be very honest and very serious about all of these questions. And if any of the behaviors in these last two groups that we looked at, changes in drinking behavior and cravings and loss of cravings and loss of control, are things that are very applicable to you, then you certainly need to seek help. If you're still not sure, or if you're not sure somebody you care about has a problem, then also ask this question here. Did any of the following sentences pop up into your head as you read the list above? And these following things here are things that alcoholics in denial have a tendency to say. I'll never become an alcoholic because when I drink too much, I get sick before I get really bombed. So that's I'll never become an alcoholic because when I drink too much, I get sick before I can get really bombed. Then alcoholics look like sloppy drunks. I never look like that, so I can be addicted. Alcoholics look like sloppy drunks. I never look like that, so I can't be addicted. Then the third statement, I only drink to please my friends. I can stop whenever I want to. I only drink to please my friends. I can stop whenever I want to. Then the next one, alcoholism doesn't run in my family. Alcoholism doesn't run in my family. And then, I never drink on nights that I have school or work. I never drink on nights that I have school or work. I only drink on weekends. I only drink on weekends. And the last statement, I only drink at parties. I only drink at parties. All of these statements might be true, yet you could still have an alcohol problem. And so we would highly recommend you to get help, and that's what we're here for at Temperance Awakening. And our email address is there. And so thank you so much for being with us, and that was our first lecture. As I said, in our next lecture, we'll look at some more things about alcohol, give out some more kind of generic information. The next one will be a little bit more of an introduction, like of what we're going to do to our following lectures there that we mentioned. And so thanks so much for being with us, though, here in this first lecture. And we'll see you next time. And as we said, our email address is there if we can help you in any way. So until the direction of the shadows flee away, I am Dr. Cooper, and I love you, and I appreciate you.